Too often, I think people feel like the necessary route they have to take is through leadership. And I think we need to give more permission to people to find an alternate route, to keep creating if that's where their heart is.
Welcome to Real Creative Leadership, a place where creative leaders can find insights and practical guidance on the day-to-day job of being a creative leader. We focus on real issues, topics, and insights of creativity in the business world. Join me as we explore the best strategies for developing your team, getting others to embrace your vision, and generating amazing experiences. This webinar series is produced by the Stoke Group. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, Adobe Executive Creative Director and author of Sorry Spot, Emotions Drive Business. And this is Real Creative Leadership.
Hello and welcome to Real Creative Leadership. Excited to have you here. This is season 2, episode 12, and we've got a great show today. So we've all experienced a ton of change over the past few years, and creativity is always about making something great, but sometimes we have to do that even when we're constrained or there's built-in friction in the process. Today, we're going to be talking with Jason Sperling to learn how he's creatively adapted in his career and grown his creative leadership, even when it's challenging. We were talking earlier, and I was like, I like this idea of like at odds. So things that are at odds. And that's definitely where we're going to be going with this session is how do you find that creativity and the positivity, even when there are things that normally seem like they're not positive or they're not great. So we're going to talk with him. Jason is currently the Global Executive Creative Director at Reality Labs. He's worked in advertising and marketing over the past 2 decades, developing great work that includes work for Apple, Honda, TikTok, Amazon, Disney, Pixar, and UNICEF worldwide. What a great lineup. And among his most notable achievements are the Apple's Mac versus PC campaign, which totally impacted my career. I loved it. So I'm super excited to talk to Jason about that. And we'll get into that later. But he also had 5 Super Bowl ads that have appeared on the all-time best lists. So we're excited to talk about that a little bit. And then finally, Jason has written a book recently about creative leadership. And that's why we're here on Real Creative Leadership, because that's an important aspect of what he's written on, which is making that leap from a senior creative into a management position. So we'd like to welcome Jason to the show, Real Creative Leadership. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it and happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump right in. Let's talk about your career first. It's nice to have a little bit of background from you of what you've done and where you've come from and how you've come up with all these great ideas. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey, whether that's the early stuff, the later stuff. Just give us a little bit of context of who you are.
I didn't necessarily know I was inherently creative coming out of college. And to be honest, I didn't know what commercial creativity was either, that it was an actual career path. It was right around the time that 30-something was a show on TV, and they were 2 guys in advertising who played, had a basketball hoop in the office, and they made it seem like it was a fun career. I had written on the high school paper and I had written on the college paper, but I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I ended up at UCLA. There was a job board, and there was an ad for a job that was marketing and selling condoms. And I thought, well, seems lucrative for a college student. So I called it, and it ended up being the right contact at the wrong job. It was for a creative intern job at a newspaper in LA. And so I ended up going in, taking the job, and really learning about the creative aspects of in publishing, but like making ads and understanding more about design. And so I realized that, okay, there is indeed a path here. Went into, tried getting into art schools with a very limited portfolio. And ultimately I got into one called the Academy of Art in San Francisco. And they immediately, what I came to learn in that school was that it's really what you put in. It is not, on full of standouts, but it really, like, there were people that were incredibly driven that did incredible things. And so I went there, probably stressed more than any other student at that school about, am I going to have a job coming out of this? Are my parents going to see this as a complete waste of money? Because it was still art school, which in my family, carried a stigma. And
getting an English degree, right? Where it's like, what are you going to actually do?
Yeah, but that's still like a BFA this was the less of an applicable, like sort of like well-paying job. I think they thought I was going to be smoking cigarettes in the back of a coffee house, just typing away. And after school ended, I ended up getting a job at a small agency in San Francisco. That was my introduction to advertising. And I should say I went into advertising, went in with a copywriter background, because my first class, they told me, your art direction is killing you, but your copy is okay. And I should note too that I actually had one teacher as well. I mean, it was definitely they ground you down and wanted to get you ready for the real world. And I had one teacher, we were presenting work, and he actually went to my piece specifically and said, how many of you like this? And nobody besides one merciful person in the class raised their hand. And he said, no, it's horrible, it's shit. And he actually lit it on fire and put it in the trash can. So that was sort of the training ground. Then my first job, I worked for this absolute madman of an agency owner, who would basically patrol the hallways with a joint in his mouth, invite people to get high at the end of every day, dress people down pretty constantly, telling people, if you didn't want to get high with them, don't be a bitch. It was like an insane experience. Drug dealers coming by, selling them drugs, and him coming in late at night with people that weren't his wife, and wild. It was just wild. And
that's the era, the 80s and 90s, that are not going to happen ever again.
No. I mean, who the hell knows? But I hope not, because that was a really odd training ground. But it does actually, you form some tight bonds with your coworkers, just because you're all sort of like in this together in the trenches. So anyway, and after that, it was small agencies, and fear started to set in that I wouldn't be able to actually reach, sort of the plateaus that I had dreamed of in school. When I was looking through all of the award books of the best work and all those agencies I was sort of dreaming to go, I just didn't have the portfolio that would get me there. I just wasn't getting the opportunities.
There are so many people who wonder if they're ever going to make it. And when we see a rock star like you in the industry, who's, created some iconic campaigns and things, it's just really interesting to hear that we all start in the same spot. We all started out of school doing condom ads, maybe not all of us, but let's talk a little bit about this, because you brought up just in that story, it brings up the point of friction. And that in our creative worlds, there are a lot of good, I think there's a great TED talk I listened to once about how like the box is important, like living within a box to have constraints before you can make something great is critical. And so having some of these moments in your career of friction where it's like you had to scratch your way up to the top, you had to scratch your way, to get into the right agencies or get the right work. Talk to me about, how does friction help us grow creatively in your perspective?
I mean, those struggles, they force you to be really innovative or tenacious, more so than you probably would have to. I feel like that type of friction is ultimately at play here when we're, especially in marketing, where we're in a culture where, we're easily ignored, we're easily opted out of, and it really forces us to be, becomes a forcing function to be more ingenious, and to figure out ways to, in essence, not do what we do. To eliminate the tropes and the conceits that we've all learned. and, find other ways, other points of connection.
And now, obviously in your career, you've gone from those early, early friction moments and gone on to do some great work. But the other thing that I want to just transition to right now is your book, because I think there's a lot to learn from that as well. Many of us in the industry had to go through that whole passage of, all right, I've been doing really, really good at the craft. I'm, getting recognition. People are seeing me as a great writer or designer, or videographer, whatever that may be. But then you look up to management and there's this huge chasm. And I think, at least for me early on, I didn't understand how big of a gap there was there. And so there were some painful moments in realizing that I wasn't ready for it, even though, everyone thinks, oh, I'm the creative director, I can call the shots, I know what I'm doing. So I'm really interested to hear, let's talk more about your book, because there is some creative friction in there of trying to make that jump. So what are some of the notable takeaways? Why did you write it? What motivated you to help share that with the world? And then what are some insights in the book that we can share?
Well, one of the insights is actually the sort of principal insight, which is, if making things makes you happy, then keep making things when you become a leader. And that's actually a really healthy thing to do when you still have that itch to be making things, but you're now at a stage of your career where you're supposed to be championing others and letting them do the bulk of the work. And so it was something that I felt like I needed to, it was cathartic and needed to be doing something. It was obvious to me that we are wired differently. We're not your typical sort of corporate person, and that we're suddenly at that point in our career when we've had success doing basically our art, that we're raised up to a level where we're doing something completely different, where we're leading, which is a completely different skill set. And it's something that's not necessarily innate to us. In marketing, creative people, we often, spend time locked in a room thinking of ideas. We're not necessarily involved in the broader corporate culture. And we're suddenly thrust into a management position where we're part of now of like a leadership culture. We've made it a point in our careers to really point the spotlight on ourselves, because that is essentially how you get ahead in creativity, in creative careers. And then suddenly we're asked to now put the spotlight on others, which is a really, really hard thing to do, because so much of our ego and self-identity is wrapped up in our talent, in our art. We go through dark periods of when we're making things with, filled with self-doubt, that ultimately once we've solved it, it's like, aha, and suddenly you go through a period of I'm amazing. I'm way better than I thought I was. So anyway, it was a combination of this need for something that wasn't there. I mean, there's a million management books out there, but none really skewed towards the creative mind. And it just felt like, based on our skills, based on our wiring, based on the fact that, we're coming at this from a disadvantage, from on our back foot, because we haven't gone to business school. We haven't, been, what we've been doing, the skills we've been learning haven't been leading up to this. They've been wholly separate. It just felt like a natural thing to do. And I was at a conference when it sort of dawned on me. There was a panel there, and on the panel, someone made the connection of you get better training for a management position in a fast food restaurant than you do in an advertising agency. And that really resonated, because having come, at some point in my career, they just said, you're going to become a creative director. Great, well-deserved. And there was no training that went along with it. There was really just do what we do. And it was a totally different job. And so that's when the light bulb went off that, I think this is possibly a worthwhile thing. And then the thing that I wanted to make sure that I did with it is not necessarily reduce it down to my field of vision. Marketing is just one of many commercial creative careers. There's production and design of any number of design, industrial and architecture, and a number of creative careers that this is applicable to. And so I felt like in order to widen that aperture and for people to see that how it connected back to them, was to bring in other voices. And so I was able to bring in some really amazing people, idols of mine, some of them, directors like Ava DuVernay and Joe Russo, who directed the Avengers movies, people from Apple, Google, Disney, huge leaders from marketing, people from TV production as well, where it's really interesting hearing their perspectives. The head of the executive producer on Rick and Morty shared stories about basically in his position he's got to run a writer's room where, as he puts it, it's basically an entire room filled with the people who are voted class clown in their high school, that you have to wrangle some pretty fragile egos as they're throwing jokes out. Some land with a thud and really, you have to figure out how do you lift people up when it's not working, in that really like boiler room kind of environment.
That's a lot of great stuff. I hope everyone's listening along for all of that. I want to jump back a little bit. You've gone through so many different things that I want to unpack a little bit. But first, I have to say the hilarious part is, and we talked about this earlier, that same conference where you heard the comment about you get better training at a fast food joint than at an ad agency. I was at that same conference with you, and I think it's no surprise that where real creative leadership has come from. Not just that, but it had been something that was on my mind as well. That we struggle in this industry, that we don't have good guidance. We don't have a user manual of how to jump into a leadership position. So I appreciate that. And I feel like there are probably more out there that are having the same thoughts as you and I, that there's got to be some more guidance. And so taking the time to write a book or create a show, I think is awesome for us to get engaged with other people out there, because it is a major problem. Like, you start with all those soft skills, you like calling the creative cave. Like, your career gets better by you focusing in that flow state and just like really focusing on the art or the writing in your quiet moments. And then all of a sudden you hit that moment where it's like, that's not what's going to push you forward. You have to do other things like the leadership, the soft skills, all of those things. So it's challenging. So I think this is a real good discussion from your perspective and as you went out and interviewed all these other people in other industries, of like how they do it. How do you lead teams? How do you, manage to the individual rather than to a big group? I think those are all awesome things.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more than about that. Like let's talk about, how do you create some of that in your team right now? How are you creating the right environment, or how do you just tell us about some of the things that you do today to help encourage people on your team to grow and get to that point? That would be awesome to hear.
It's an interesting transition, having been in agency culture and going into more of a corporate culture. It's the tech space, but this is a really mature tech company. And they have a lot of, policy and training. And one thing that actually is really healthy about it, and I continue to grow too, and understand, they have a huge feedback program where there's a lot of feedback given both ways. It's very reflective, and it happens on a regular basis, so that you're really getting a sense of their satisfaction, their sort of state of mind and where they feel like they are and where they want to be, and just a better understanding. It's a little more fast and loose at, in my agency days. Here it really is taken pretty seriously. It's this place is, what I found too is it's a very democratic culture, more so than I've ever experienced.
Coming from agency, that's interesting, because you normally think the agency is Wild West, where it's all the people doing crazy stuff, but hearing that it's more democratic, that's fascinating.
I mean, it's democratic in the sense that a lot of people are given the chance to really like give their input, share their thoughts, and we as leaders entertain thoughts from a much wider swath of people. It's and it might just be more the culture, and not necessarily myself, where it's like you want to hear where those, what people have to say. And even though they're not necessarily, creative isn't in their title, you want to hear, because there's so many cross-functional partners. I mean, one thing that's really interesting about this job is that, whereas, being at an agency or being at a design firm or being at a production company, I guess, you are primarily doing your art, your craft, and you're working with clients. And now going into the client side, you primarily are a product company with a marketing arm. So you really become a specialist, but not necessarily the all-star. The all-stars are the ones who are coding, for the apps, or who are making the incredible, VR technology that goes into Quest. So you're there doing your thing, but you're not necessarily, that standout. So there's a little bit more humility in it. And it means that there's just a lot more partners and voices that you have to listen to and take note of. Having been a leader where, I really have always wanted to hear from people, have wanted to hear, dissenting views just as much as I want to hear agreement. I love a culture like this. I just think at the end of the day, what's so key is, while we have a really democratic way of doing things, you want, at the end of the day, a benevolent dictatorship, where it's like someone is going to come in and be a strong, decisive decision maker. Because ultimately, if you don't, I just feel like it just leads to swirl and chaos.
I mean, I find it fascinating that it's almost a sign of a more mature creative company when they allow, people to mingle into areas that they're not normal, is not normally their specialty. Meaning, we're here trying to tell creatives, like, step it up, become a better creative leader. And you do that by learning to speak business and learning to understand other aspects, soft skills, like we've talked about,
right.
And make that jump to creative leader. You've got to have some of those skills. And yet there's this inclination from some creative people to be like, oh, you're not a creative. Don't tell me, don't get in my business. You may be a marketer or a whatever, a different financial person. Well, you're saying that democracy is really good, because ideas can come from everywhere, and you have to be really, truly open to that, and not just in theory, but in practicality. And I think that's really nice, because they have to be able to welcome us to the business side. We need to welcome them to the creative side. Yeah. And that shows the maturity of an organization. Well, there's one other area I want to talk about. And you touched on this early on, which is a little bit about the ego of a creative, and they're moving, from one world to the next. And it's like, I'm so great today because I did this awesome ad. And then the next, 2 weeks later, you're like, I'm the worst on the planet because what have I done lately? But I'd love to talk a little bit more about, like, so how do we deal with that psychology of, like, as you grow in your career, like we all do it. We all do it. Like, you think you're the best, you think you're the worst. How do we kind of level that out a little bit more? What are some of the things that are the tips that you can give our listeners to help them think, okay, I still have value regardless of these up and downs that I get with the creative work?
I mean, I think a few things. One is it's absolutely learned. I think that you can't necessarily like teach it out of someone. You know, those you have to give permission for those feelings, and it's feelings that we all have, and it's natural, and in some ways it's a driver. You know, I mean, we've all had that, like, you know, at the 11th hour, haven't gotten anything, and you're pushing yourself so hard, and you have that moment of that stroke of genius. So it's not all bad, but I feel like as a leader, what you want to do is minimize exacerbating it. You want to find ways to mitigate it, in my personal opinion. And I see so much in a lot of creative environments that there is this atmosphere of, you know, if you don't get it right, you know, if you don't have any value, then, you know, you can be replaced. You know, there's I remember, you know, I've had a lot of creative leaders who, you know, they push you through fear and driving anxiety and pitting you against other people. And if you win, you win. If you don't, you know, you're thought of as a loser. And that's an ego killer. That is crushing. And I've always wanted to try and eliminate as much of that as possible, because we've already got that. It's innate to who we are. And so my goal is to try and take as much of that off the table, of fear of losing my job, fear of being irrelevant, fear of someone else, you know, winning the pitch versus me, fear of not being the favorite. Take that off the table and just be creative. And hopefully you've got people who are innately driven to want to do this stuff, that, you know, it doesn't take a huge push, you know. And so yeah, I mean, trying to, you know, I try and be as supportive as I can be. I try and acknowledge feelings for sure. You know, some days are rough, and you know, when it doesn't go someone's way, you know, to be there for them versus punish them for it.
I love this. I just want to jump in a minute, because there are a few stories that we quickly share. I think between the two of us, is like, for me starting out, it was like I was working on the Intel account, and it was like working on TV spots, and there would be like 10 teams all battling it out in this huge, you know, battle royale to see who got the best spot approved by the client. But there were a lot of those feelings of, yeah, people would hide work from each other. They weren't open. There was like a lot of internal competition that was just gone too far. And I think later on now, as I'm running teams, I have those same feelings of like, I want to give some ownership to each of the teams. They don't feel like they have to, you know, scrap it out to get some recognition, otherwise they're worthless. And then they didn't get, you know, they didn't win. And so they're lame. But I think there were some stories I read from you doing the same thing during the, you know, just the round after round after round of going through those Mac versus PC ads, that sure, there were great things that came out of it, but the process of getting there is pretty rough.
Yeah, it really, that place had no problem. I shouldn't say that place, because I don't want to necessarily trash an agency, but I do think the way that things were run back then, it was a little bit more of a, you know, we're going to push you to the brink. You know, because it was somehow, in some ways we were mirroring the culture of Apple, and mirroring in some ways the Steve Jobs sort of mentality of like, get it right. If you don't, I don't need you. You know, it was kind of a little bit of that, you know, and somewhat cruel, but you know, can't help but acknowledge the man's genius. You know, the hope was to sort of bring that environment to the team. And we, because of the way things were run, and there was no big strategy machine on the Apple side. There was Steve with, here's my proclamation, here's what I want, go make it. You were creative people were carrying the burden of helping him arrive at strategy. So you would go round after round with, here's the work, and he would go, none of that works, but now I know it's not that. Which is great.
I'll know it when I see it.
So happy to help. But it was, there was a cadence to what we did. It was like every Wednesday, we'd bring stuff up the mountain to, and then bring it back down with the sort of like decree of, he liked it, he hated it, this is on life support, everything else is dead. And people over the course of months were just getting worn out, losing hope, because we did a lot of we brought in a lot of work, and sometimes you knew right away that this was the favorite, and so you felt like, all right, well, I'm going to be working all weekend and well into the night, so it's worth it. And other times you felt like, I don't know if anybody really loves it, and there's I'm going to keep going on it because I'm being asked to. Mm-hmm. But you just felt like, you were just doing that every single week. And if you felt like this really doesn't have a chance, it was brutal, because it wasn't like death. It was like, you're still doing it, knowing that there's no chance. It's the work without the reward, I guess. And routinely I'd have people in my office, breaking down in tears saying, I can't do this anymore. It definitely became part work, part therapy, going into the later rounds of whether we were launching Mac and PC or whether we were launching the first iPhone or the first iPad. It was just like, there was so much lead up, and rightfully so to a certain extent from Apple's perspective. These are big products. You have big industry changing things that require, you're carrying on a company's legacy of incredible ads, that drive culture and drive sales, and everything, whatever you did had to live up to that. But it was not healthy. No.
That's fair. And lessons going forward. It's not that, we just complain about the golden days, but I think I like your advice of just trying to understand the situation of the individual and try and help create the right environment so that you can still have great ideas and we can still thrive without having to have all the negative, battling it out over concepts and things that we went through in the past. I think that's super valuable. As we close up here, I'm just curious if you have any other last advice on, how to become a better creative leader, whether it's a tip from your book or just things that you in general. We've talked about environment and understanding the person. We've talked about, how to get past ego, but anything else that's good insight?
I think we need to give more permission to not become a leader. I think that too often, I think people feel like the necessary route they have to take is through leadership in order to survive, in order to make more money, in order to, just last. And I think we need to give more permission to people to say, to find an alternate route, to keep creating if that's where their heart is. And so I think that's one part of it that I feel is necessary.
Well, that's awesome. In fact, you brought that up early in the beginning, and I was going to respond to that it's like, I've had that conversation with so many people where they're like, I see everyone else becoming an ACD, and I guess I need to do that, or it's my turn to do that. What do I do? And it's not necessarily the right answer. It's so funny. The lesson I learned once from a group of developers, I was at a conference, and it was a room full of developers, and a woman got up at the front and said, all right, who wants to be a manager? And one hand in the entire audience went up. And I thought, what's going on here? Because if I were in a creative group, it's like, who wants to be the creative director? Every hand is going to go up, like me. I want to be in charge, right? And so there is some truth to that. We actually did a survey with creative leaders this last fall, And it's interesting to see how like a third of them, after they reach like ECD, just finally realize they want to go back and just do the craft. And so they go back and just do freelance. So it's totally fine. I think there are more and more career paths now that you can still stay a senior creative and get paid great and have a great career and not have to go into management and be a creative director. I think that's totally viable.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. It's still a difficult discussion to have, with someone who doesn't quite know what they don't know. In fact, I'm having that conversation with a friend right now who is really feeling like he is at a CD level and he's getting offers to become an ECD and with executive creative director. And I'm trying to tell him about, you really have to embrace, all facets of this, a lot more management and a lot more of that side of things, a lot of, dealing with, leadership across different groups, really getting into the company culture, and you have to embrace that. And, he's someone that's spent a long time being a freelance person where, the life of a freelancer is you don't have to be in a company culture and you don't have to do any of the more officious bureaucratic stuff. You really just get to do your craft, you slide it under the door and you're done, and it's on to the next thing. And it's so different. And I'm probably over concerned that he does the right thing for him. And of course, the instincts, he's concerned about the money and that title that doesn't come around very often. So,
but you're right though, there's more to it than just title and sometimes money. I don't think that's always true, but it's your happiness, your quality of life. I mean,
100%.
I remember talking with this one person who was thinking that he needed to make that jump. And I just said, let me talk about the real life of a creative director or creative leader. Like, I'm dealing with finance all the time. I'm in meetings all day. That's all I do are just meetings. And it's talking through all those things you talk about, the bureaucracy, the culture, the, hiring, it's all these other stuff that's not the craft. So if you love the craft, don't give that up if that's what drives you and makes you happy.
Right. When you say it, it's so motivating. You have a way about you that it's so good.
That's just having had that conversation too many times. And I'm like,
yeah.
It's okay.
I feel like you've had that conversation a few times. Just the way you said that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, okay, that's a good thing to end on. Don't give yourself space. Go for what you love. Go for what you're passionate about. Life is too short. I think, the lessons we also learned from that research is that so many creative leaders, and I say this out of both sides of my mouth because I want more people to become creative leaders. I want more people to push the top. I want more people to make an impact on our industry and to drive it in new ways. Absolutely. But there are a lot of them that, realize they've just chosen the wrong thing and they get burned out and are unhappy. So pick what's right for you. If that's being a creative freelancer, awesome. Learn to make the right amount of money and make a good living out of it and be happy. I think that's an awesome choice. Thank you, Jason. This has been a wonderful conversation. I definitely am more pumped about just really considering my own personal career or, my highs and lows and my egos and some of the great advice you've given us. So thank you for being on the show here with us today.
Great. Let's do a follow-up and it'll be more focused on you and your goals and we'll figure it out.
I would love it.
Can we do that?
I'm going to follow up later. This is great. We don't even have to record it.
No, thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on and let me talk your ear off.
Oh, you bet. Well, thank you everyone else also for listening to us. As always, you can find us here at realcreativeleadership.com. We've got a full catalog of past shows that you can check out. Also, if you like this, there are other shows on YouTube. We've been posting them all there, and there's a great following on YouTube. So feel free to join us. You can also email the site, ask a question or for a future topic if you would like to, or follow us on the social channels and get engaged there. We'd really appreciate any involvement that you give us. As always, you can find me at adamwmorgan.com, and you can learn more about the Stoke Group. They're the ones producing this show at thestokedgroup.com. They're a digital marketing agency. We appreciate their help. And Jason, where can people find you if they want to follow up or just follow your career or ask you a question? What are your locations?
I'm at 3930. Oh, not
Digital.
the digital. I think I just changed my Twitter handle to that Sperling. And then, LinkedIn is my name. And the book is on Amazon. It's called Creative Directions, Mastering the Transition from Talent to Leader.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was going to bring it up. How do we find your book? Where do we get it? Make sure people out there read it, and especially those who are at that chasm trying to make the leap. I think this would be a phenomenal read. So thank you so much for writing that.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, there you go. Thanks for joining us. The big ask again, leave a comment, like or share any of the episodes, post a comment or question on social media. We appreciate your engagement and thank all those who have engaged so far. Thanks again, Jason, for being on the show, and we'll see you at our next episode.
Thanks for listening to Real Creative Leadership. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, and this series was brought to you by the Stoke Group. For the most effective marketing, use both sides of your brain to align your strategy, creative execution, and analysis. Connect with the Stoke Group for help designing each step of your marketing plan and creating a coherent vision. Visit thestokegroup.com to learn more.